the jab.
I woke up standing in the middle of an intersection, barefoot, shivering. It was 3 in the morning and the world was wrong. The streetlights hummed faintly overhead, but their glow was too cold, too pale, as if they were lit by moonlight instead of electricity. The traffic lights cycled from red to green to yellow for no one. The buildings on either side of me were black silhouettes, hollow and unlit. There was no wind, no cause, no sound, and when I looked down there was blood on my hands. It wasn't mine. I'd been sick for weeks, one of those lingering, body-breaking illnesses that leaves you hollowed out. I'd wake in the night gasping for breath, chest aching like something was pressing on it from the inside. The fever left me soaked, trembling, unable to tell if I was hot or freezing. The worst part wasn't the pain, it was the helplessness, the sense that my own body had turned against me. I watched the news obsessively. Every channel was talking about the same thing, the vaccine rollout, people smiling for cameras as they got the jab, doctors in crisp coats reassuring the nation. But I didn't want the public spectacle. I didn't trust the long lines in crowded halls, the chattering nurses handing out stickers. I wanted something quieter. That's how I found them. It was late one night, 2:14 a.m., the blue glow of my phone the only light in my apartment. I was scrolling a conspiracy forum, not because I believed all of it, but because sometimes the strangest truths hide between the lies. Buried deep in a thread about unregistered vaccine centers, I found an address. No name, no phone number, just Praxis, 11 Rue D, knock twice. There were replies saying it was safer than official sites, that they give you the good batch, whatever that meant. I told myself I didn't believe the paranoia. I told myself I just wanted to skip the wait. The address took me to a narrow side street I'd never noticed before. The buildings leaned over it like they were trying to hide something. The air smelled faintly of wet cardboard and rusted pipes. The Praxis had no sign, no markings, just a dark green door set into stained concrete. The paint was peeling like sunburned skin. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. No chatter, no beeping machines, no TVs mounted in the corners. The air was still, heavy with a smell I couldn't place. Antiseptic, yes, but underneath that, something faintly sweet, like fruit left out just a little too long. I heard no footsteps, but a curtain at the back of the room shifted, and she stepped out. Tall. Too tall for the ceiling. Skin pale enough to make her veins look like fine blue cracks beneath the surface. Her eyes were dark, not brown, not black, but like 2 holes cut into the world. Her uniform hung loose, the fabric slightly faded, and the name tag was blank. "Sit," she said, her voice low, even, almost melodic. Her hands were cold when they wrapped around my arm, her fingers long and jointed strangely, like they bent in more places than they should. The needle slid in without me feeling it. But when she pressed the plunger, something moved inside me, like a ripple beneath my skin, but deeper, behind my eyes, threading through the roots of my thoughts. She smiled then, a slow, thin curve of the lips that never reached her eyes. "You'll be fine," she said. I'm still not sure if it was meant to comfort me or warn me. That night I slept harder than I had in months. No dreams, no tossing and turning, just a thick, perfect blackness. When I woke, I was in my kitchen, standing, holding a knife. The stove was on, all 4 burners glowing red, but there was nothing cooking. Just a pot of water boiling so violently it splashed over the edge, sizzling against the metal. The clock said 3:47 a.m. I didn't remember getting up. It didn't happen every night at first, but soon, The blackouts came more often. I would close my eyes in bed and open them somewhere else entirely. The first place was a park I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. I woke up lying on a bench, my breath fogging in the cold air. The wood beneath me was damp, and moss had crept up its legs. Above, the sky was a flat, dirty grey. In the trees, crows sat in rows, dozens of them, but none made a sound. They weren't watching the sky. They were all facing me. The second place was an abandoned swimming pool. I was standing in the cracked basin, waist-deep in stagnant rainwater. The smell of rust and algae clung to me, though my clothes were perfectly dry. Faded graffiti twisted along the walls like something alive. Something cold brushed my leg under the surface, but when I looked down, the water was still. The third place was a basement I didn't recognize. The air was damp and cloying, thick with the smell of mold and that faint sweetness again. The walls were lined with shelves. On them, instead of tools or jars, sat rows of rotary phones. They were all ringing, not together, each with its own slow, deliberate chime echoing off the wet stone walls. I picked one up, no voice, just breathing, and then my voice, low and calm, whispering, "Almost ready." At first, the voices came when I was falling asleep, barely audible murmurs like a radio station just out of range. But soon, they were there in the daylight too, woven between my own thoughts. "You're close now. They made you perfect. Not much longer." They didn't sound human, not entirely. The words were right, but the cadence was wrong, like something learning to speak, stretching syllables in strange places, letting silence sit too long between breaths. Sometimes, when they spoke, I'd see flashes, like film frames burned into my vision. Hands that weren't mine, eyes opening in darkness, scales catching the light, slick with something black. It was a Tuesday morning. Rain streaked the glass of my apartment window, making the street below ripple and bend. My coffee sat cooling on the table, untouched. I don't know why I picked up the newspaper, habit, maybe, but the headline froze me in place. Reptilian creature attacks in broad daylight. The photograph was grainy, but clear enough to show the thing mid-motion. Its body hunched low, skin dark and ridged like the hide of something that had never seen sunlight. Its mouth was unhinged wider than seemed possible, teeth sunk into the neck of a man who was already falling. But my eyes weren't on the thing's face. They were on the clothes. The hoodie, gray, washed to the color of ash. The tear on the left sleeve. I knew it as intimately as my own skin. The coffee went cold between my fingers. I stared until the image seemed to flicker, as though the grain of the newsprint couldn't hold it still. For a moment, just a fraction of a moment, I thought the creature's head turned toward the camera. Not in the jerking way of an animal caught off guard, but with a slow, deliberate tilt. The rain outside intensified, a constant hiss that filled the room. I felt my breathing match its rhythm. The walls of my apartment seemed to draw closer, the corners deepening into shadows. My reflection in the window was dim, warped by the water, but something about the shape of it was wrong. The proportions stretched, the posture subtly altered. The paper slipped from my hand and landed on the floor, the photograph folding on itself. I didn't move to pick it up. My gaze stayed fixed on the window, though I wasn't sure if I was looking out or in. Somewhere far below, a car horn blared once, then cut off abruptly. The rain didn't stop. The shadows didn't recede. I sat there, hands motionless around the cooling cup, as a strange weight settled over me, not on my skin, but deeper in the places thought should be. And in that stillness, with the hiss of the rain filling my ears, I had the distinct, skin-crawling sensation that the photograph was still watching me. the shadow people. The first time I saw one, it was standing inside my shadow. It didn't move when I did. And when I stepped away, it stayed where it was, still shaped like me, but wrong. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts. I'm the kind who laughs at horror movies, who rolls her eyes when friends share their spooky stories at dinner. Or at least I was. It started 2 months ago, the day I fell off my bike. I'd been riding home from the market, a bag of groceries balanced awkwardly in the basket. A pothole appeared where there shouldn't have been one. My wheel hit it, the world tilted, and I skidded across the asphalt hard enough to scrape my knees bloody. I got up dizzy, with a ringing in my ears, and thought nothing of it. I limped home, cleaned myself up, and didn't give the fall another thought. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m., certain that someone was in my apartment. The air felt occupied. My skin prickled. The moonlight through the curtains showed the familiar furniture of my bedroom, and in the corner, where the shadows were thickest, was the silhouette of a person. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It was just there, blacker than the rest of the dark. When I reached for my phone, it dissolved, like smoke sucked into an invisible vent. I told myself it was a hallucination from the concussion. But that wasn't the last time. A week later, I was in my building's basement. I'd gone down to check the breaker box after the power flickered. The concrete steps were cold under my bare feet, and the light bulb overhead buzzed and swayed on its wire. The breaker was fine. I turned to leave, then froze. The far corner of the basement was darker than the rest. Not just dark, dense, the way a deep ocean looks in the middle of the night. Something shifted inside it. I could just make out the curve of a head, the slant of shoulders, a suggestion of arms hanging too long. It wasn't standing still, it was breathing. The light flickered once, and the shape was suddenly closer. Not walking, not stepping, just nearer, like it had traded places with the air between us. The bulb snapped back on, and it was gone. But the corner still felt heavy, like it hadn't truly left. I didn't go back to the basement for weeks. It was a rare sunny morning, and I decided to have my coffee outside on the patio. The warmth felt good, and for a few moments I thought maybe I'd been imagining everything. The street was quiet. A single car drove by. I took a sip of coffee and let my eyes wander over the houses opposite mine. That's when I saw it. On the roof of the house across the street stood a human shape. It was tall, too tall, its head nearly brushing the power lines. It was entirely black, no light catching on it anywhere, as though it refused the sun. It was looking directly at me. I couldn't see eyes, but I knew. I blinked, and now it was crouched at the edge of the roof, its limbs bent at wrong angles. Another blink, and it was gone. The coffee in my hand was cold by the time I could move again. I work in a small marketing firm, my desk tucked in the far corner near the window. That day had been normal: emails, phone calls, a meeting about a client's product launch. It was late afternoon when I noticed movement in the reflection of my monitor. Someone was standing behind me. I spun around. No one. But the reflection in my screen hadn't changed. The dark figure still stood there, unmoving in the image. But the space behind me was empty. I reached out toward the reflected shape, my fingers trembling. It tilted its head. Not in the real room, but in the reflection. The monitor flickered to black. When the image came back, the figure was gone, but the air smelled faintly of something burnt. After that, they came more often. Not every time I blinked, but enough to make me dread the dark spaces between streetlights, the stretch of shadow under my desk, the blind corners in hallways. They were in the grocery store aisle, standing between shelves of cereal. They were at the bus stop, their heads turning slowly as I walked past. Once, I woke in bed to find one leaning over me, its shape outlined against the pale glow from my phone charger. Always silent, always closer than the last time. I don't believe in magic, or I didn't, but fear will make you try anything. Her name was Lydia. People whispered about her on the edge of town, a woman who sold herbs and read cards in a cluttered little house that smelled of smoke and honey. She listened without interrupting as I told her about the fall, the shadows, the way they moved. Her eyes never left mine, and I realized uncomfortably that she wasn't surprised. When I was done, she said, "They are not ghosts. They are travelers, the shadow people." I laughed, a brittle sound. Travelers from where? Her voice was low, almost pitying. From where the light does not go. They live in the in-between, between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the blink and the breath. And they are moving. Moving where? I asked, though I already hated the answer forming in my mind. She didn't smile. Here, into our world. They follow injury, weakness, the places where your self is loosened. Your fall opened you to them. Since that night, I've been counting. Every day, they're closer. On Monday, I saw one across the street. On Wednesday, it was at the gate to my yard. On Friday, I woke to find the faint outline of a handprint on my bedroom wall, pressed deep into the paint. I keep the lights on. I drink coffee until my hands shake. I tell myself that as long as I don't blink for too long, I'll be safe. But tonight I can feel them in the hall outside my door. The air is cold, and I can hear the faint rustle of something moving without feet. They've migrated, and they've found me. The sleep signal. The first time it happened, I thought it was just another bad night. But when I woke up, the moon was too close. It hung low in the sky like a great white eye, and the street was full of people. Every single one of them was standing in silence, faces tilted upward. And I was one of them. I've had sleep problems for as long as I can remember. Not the kind you fix with tea, white noise, or lavender oil. This was deeper. Like my body didn't remember the instructions for rest. Some nights I'd lie still for hours, feeling the seconds pool into minutes, then into hours. Sometimes I'd feel half asleep, but hear everything. The hum of the fridge, the ticking pipes, the faint rush of cars in the distance. It was like being stuck on the edge of a dream without ever falling in. It got worse in the summer of the blackouts. The city's power grid was unstable, collapsing under the weight of too many air conditioners and industrial demands. The outages came without warning, cutting off TV, lights, fans. My apartment building sat in darkness for hours at a time, the only light the faint orange glow from the street lamps outside. The first few nights, it was just irritating. Then I started hearing it, beneath the quiet, a faint, steady thrum, like a faraway engine idling. I thought it was my own blood in my ears, but it was too slow, too deliberate. It wasn't like any dream I'd had before. I was standing on ice that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky above was an impossible blue, so clear I felt like I could fall upward into it. There was no wind, no sound, except the faint crack of shifting ice beneath my feet. Then I saw them. They were tall, over twice my height, and their bodies were smooth, pale, and seamless, like marble sculpted by hands that had never known imperfection. Their heads elongated toward the back, tapering to a point, and their black eyes reflected light like still water. They moved in slow, deliberate arcs, each motion too precise to be human. Around them rose structures unlike anything I'd ever seen. Spirals of glassy metal, bridges of crystal that caught the sun and scattered it into rainbows across the snow. They were building something enormous. One of them turned its gaze on me. It wasn't like being looked at. It was like having your mind picked up and examined. I woke with my skin damp and my heart pounding. The image burned into my eyelids. The next day, I was taking the trash out when I saw Emma, my neighbor from across the hall. She was in her usual blue cardigan, her eyes shadowed like she hadn't slept well. She stopped, looked at me strangely, and said, "I had the strangest dream last night." My skin prickled before she even described it. She told me about the ice, the sky, the towering beings, and the crystalline city. Even the way one of them had turned, as if it knew we were there. When I asked if she'd ever dreamed it before, she shook her head. And it didn't feel like a dream. The dream didn't come every night, but when it did, the city had changed. The spirals were taller, more complex, their surfaces etched with patterns that shifted subtly when I tried to look directly at them. The beings worked without pause, placing impossible objects in the air that stayed suspended as though gravity didn't apply. Sometimes, far in the distance, I thought I saw other human figures, but they were too still, as if frozen in the act of watching. It happened on a Thursday. I went to bed late, staring at the slow rotation of the ceiling fan. The next thing I knew, I was barefoot in the middle of the street. The moon hung low and unnaturally large, bathing everything in silver light. Around me, my neighbors stood in silence, their heads tilted back, eyes fixed upward. Their faces were slack, not asleep, not awake, just emptied. We stood like that for what could have been minutes or hours. Then, all at once, we turned and began walking back toward our homes. I have no memory of the walk itself, just the moment I lay down in bed again, the sheets cold against my skin. The next morning, Emma's eyes found mine in the hallway. We didn't even have to speak. But later that day, I caught another neighbor, Mr. Harris from 5B, watching me in the lobby. Not casually, not out of politeness. His gaze was fixed, unblinking, as though he knew something. When our eyes met, his lips curled into the faintest smile before he turned away. I told myself I was imagining it. But that night, I dreamed again. The city was bigger now, vast enough that I couldn't see where it ended. Towers arched into the sky and vanished into the clouds. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating faintly with a low hum that resonated through my bones. The beings moved in pairs now, their heads turning toward each other in ways that suggested communication. Between them, objects passed, floating, shimmering, reshaping themselves as they moved. In the center of the city, a ring-shaped structure had begun to form. Its inner surface was lined with shifting symbols that flickered like light on water. The next time I woke outside, it wasn't just my street. I was in the park, barefoot, the grass cool against my skin. Dozens of people were there, arranged in perfect concentric circles. No one spoke. No one moved. Their eyes were open, but their faces were expressionless. Somewhere in the silence, I thought I heard the same hum from the dream, faint but insistent. When morning came, I found a smear of frost on my bedroom window, even though it was the middle of September. It wasn't just Emma and me anymore. At the corner store, the cashier, a young man I'd barely spoken to, looked up as I walked in. His expression was blank, but his eyes followed me all the way to the back aisle. When I left, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass door, his head tilted just slightly, as though listening to something I couldn't hear. The blackout nights grew more frequent, and on those nights, the hum seemed louder. The city was almost complete. The spirals and towers glowed faintly from within, their light pulsing in slow rhythms. The ring at the center spun, the symbols now bright and sharp, rearranging themselves faster than I could follow. The beings stood in a wide circle around it, their eyes fixed on the sky. I realized then that the city wasn't for them. It was for something else. The hum grew so loud I thought the ice would split beneath me. I woke not in the street, but on the overpass above the freeway. Below me, the roads were empty. The traffic lights cycled through their colors in silence. Emma stood beside me, her blue cardigan fluttering faintly in a wind I couldn't feel. In the distance, beyond the city skyline, lightning forked silently across the sky. The next morning, I woke in bed, the light outside heavy and strange, the air pressed against my skin like damp cloth. On the television, every channel was the same. Satellite images of a hurricane so massive it filled the entire frame, its spirals dwarfing the ocean beneath. The anchor's voice was calm but unsteady, describing it as a once-in-history event, moving with impossible speed toward the coast. I sat there, staring, the hum from my dreams still vibrating in my bones. On the screen, the hurricane's spirals tightened, shifting in shape, just slightly, just enough for me to recognize them. They were the same patterns that spun inside the great ring in the ice. Outside, the sky darkened to the color of lead. And for the first time, I felt sure I would not wake up again.